when we talk about poor people and, they're the ones that are finding it the hardest to pay back these loans, how does the recent change in the government's proposal to overhaul uni fees play into that? Will they find it tougher to pay it back because now some courses have become more expensive? And will the changes that the government is trying to bring actually make people change their mind in terms of the degree choice?
Yeah, it's all the same kind of issue. If you don't have to pay for something now, we ask the question, will it change your behaviour eventually? And the changes that the government has recently announced, they're not yet law, but they might be, have seen radical changes in the charge for different courses that weren't true before. Like humanities costs have gone up by 60% and others have gone down. The basic prediction from economic theory and from all our experience with contingent loan is this won't matter. It will not affect people's choice, but it will make them unhappy. If you always wanted to study philosophy or political science or history, that is humanities, you will now have to pay longer. You won't have to pay more at the beginning. You'll have to pay for a longer time period. That's what happens with an income contingent loan. So at the moment, you'll pay somewhere between 1% and 8% of your income once you're over the threshold. If you're never over the threshold, it's irrelevant. But once you're over the threshold and the government adds, say, let me just make it up, $20,000 to your debt, that doesn't cost you $20,000. That means that in 10 years' time, you're going to have to pay for an extra few years. So here's one of the critical points about this for a young person. If you're 18 years old and you are going to study humanities and they've added $20,000 to your debt, instead of it being 25, it now becomes 45, this will have no effect on your life except the way you feel about it for 12 years. You don't have to pay anything more now, and then you've got to pay off the debt, which might take you 10 years plus a few more years of study. So you're asking the 18-year-old to be concerned about something that's going to happen when they're 34 years old, which is almost double their age. So we have in economics a concept called discounting. That means whatever happens in the future doesn't matter so much. And if you say to an 18-year-old, you're going to have to pay 4% of your income for a couple of extra years starting in 16 years' time, what effect do you think this will have? And the answer is, we think it will have no effect.
And I imagine as well is that when they announce the changes or the proposed changes, and if it does get passed in the Senate, is that while the changes may seem big now, in maybe a few years' time, it will just be, I think, a new normal that people just go, oh, this is just a normal price for a humanities subject. But for now, people are seeing it's a big increase. But in a few years' time, it will just be the regular price for a humanities subject.
I think that's completely accurate. And I'll give you an example where this is exactly what happened. There's better empirical work in England than there is in Australia. And the reason is that with their income contingent loan, which is just like HECS, which is universal, it's got a first threshold of repayment. In that context, the government in 2012 trebled the price. So it's a uniform price, and it went from £3,000 per full-time student year to £9,000 per full-time student year. And people said at the time, this will be the end of student participation for poor people, for women, for immigrants. Everyone will be so averse to this debt that they'll stop coming. We saw nothing in the enrolment data. In fact, the system got bigger because the government had more money to make it bigger. There was a 10% fall in applications, but you still had the same number of people coming. But as you implied, Nathan, that this was one-off. It lasted for 1 year. After 1 year, everything was back to normal. And one of the reasons that this happens is that people in these systems have got protection. It's not as if they've got to find the money now. They didn't have to find 6,000 extra pounds this year, the year after, and the year after that. It's all in the future. And it's all in the context of insurance. So if you haven't got it now, you don't have to worry about finding it if you're poor in the future, because if you're poor in the future, you don't pay.
Bruce, how do universities get funding? Because this price increase for, say, humanities, does that help the uni boost their funding, or where does the money go that's being increased?
The way it works, there's two parts of the contribution to the university. The first part is what's written down as the debt for the student. That is the charge. The university charge is how much people have to borrow to pay off HECS. So that is now gone up in humanities by a very large amount. It's at least doubled or something. I haven't got the data with me.
113% for
Okay,
humanities.
It's more than double. But there's another part as well, which is a government subsidy independent of the amount that the student is going to repay. So the first point is that the university gets all the money that the student on paper is going to repay down the track with an interest rate subsidy. So the student pays far less than what the university gets anyway, because the university gets it now. The university also gets the government contribution. Now, for the humanities, the government contribution has fallen, but it has not fallen to the extent that the student charge has gone up. So the net effect is that humanities is now more attractive to universities than previously. They get more money in total. They don't actually care if it comes from a student obligation. It won't affect the universities. They'll pay it back to the government. They just care about the total bundle. So long as we are correct that the price response to this is going to be small, humanities should be boosted. And the opposite's going to happen to the courses that the government is seeking to have people more interested in if the total package has fallen for them. The fee might have fallen for teaching, but if there's also been a less than offset in terms of the government contribution, teaching can become less attractive, so long as the responsiveness of students is very small. And I'm fairly confident that it will be very small.
Could you break it down a little bit more about in terms of how the universities get more money? Because I'm understanding that in the overall scheme of things for, let's say, a humanities degree, the university would get more money.
Yeah, there are two parts to a financing of a university place. So I'm a student, I want to study history, okay? So I enroll to my university, I enroll the ANU to do history. If there's going to be an extra student in history, the government will give the university the money to cover the teaching costs of the student. That can be broken down into two components. The charge to the student for history, which might be $6,000 a year, I don't know, $8,000 a year, and an additional government contribution, which might be $4,000. So the university gets the total. They get $12,000, and so they employ history lecturers and tutors and rooms and administration people, blah, blah, blah. And that's all covered by this lump sum for the history position. So if more goes to the student charge, that doesn't affect, that can, in this case, will mean more money to the university unless it is offset by the government contribution, which is not related to it. With humanities, it's not offset. There is now more money going for a history student place than previously if this legislation is passed.
Thank you for listening to the Glad You Knew Politics podcast.